Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our Enviroschool webinar today. All information contained herein is provided solely for educational purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for professional or legal advice. Should you decide to act upon any information contained in this presentation, you do so at your own risk. All the information posted has been verified to the best of our abilities. We cannot guarantee that there are no mistakes or errors. This is the Enviroschool program at the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. Today we are presenting Cleaning Louisiana's Air, Understanding Air Quality Standards. I'm Tamika Priolo, coordinator for Enviroschool, and I will be moderating today. We will be muting everyone except for the speaker. However, just as a precaution, go ahead and keep yourself muted individually as well. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A option. Type in your questions and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. Slides and a recording of this webinar will be available on the Enviroschool website. There will be a poll at the end of this webinar to provide your feedback so we can improve our sessions. So please complete before logging off. Email any comments, questions, or concerns to enviroschool@la.gov. Also, if you would like a certificate of participation. Our speaker today is Vivian Johnson. Vivian came to LDEQ in 1991 and worked in various sections of the department. The bulk of her time in air quality, either in permitting or air quality planning. Currently, she manages the air planning section, which houses the state implementation planning group, the stack test group, and emission inventory group. She belongs to state, regional, and national associations and sits on the board of directors for Louisiana Clean Fuels and Sensara, the Central States Air Resources Association. Vivian, you may begin.
Good morning. Thank you, Tamika. And thank you everyone for joining us this morning. I sometimes forget that what I do is interesting. It becomes an everyday thing for me, and I really appreciated Tamika asking that this be one of the topics for presentation for Enviroschool in this last half of the year. It gives me an opportunity to touch base with the general public and to help you understand what we do and for me to understand what your concerns are. So I hope this morning's presentation will, if it doesn't answer all of your questions, get you thinking and asking more questions. My contact information is at the end of the slides, and I appreciate and value when I hear from the general public about areas of concern in their neighborhoods. So let's get started. While the Clean Air Act came about in 1972, it wasn't until the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990 that the states, local areas, tribes, regional areas got some sort of consistent manner in which to cure the air pollution problems. If you remember, we had the Clean Air Act came out, the Clean Water Act came out, the RCRA Resource Recovery Act came out dealing with hazardous waste. It all kind of hit at the same time. And so it took a while for all of the rules to come about in how we needed to react to getting the job done. And so my group actually follows more of the Clean Air Act than it does the state and local rules. The work that we do actually begins the process for the state rules to become in effect, and we use those in our plan. Okay, page down. Next, okay. The Clean Air Act did a few things besides set up the consistency in which we can cure air pollution problems. It set out the 6 criteria pollutants that were of most interest then, that created the biggest challenges. So EPA set national ambient air quality standards. We call those the NAAQS. In setting these standards, they have primary and secondary levels, and that comes in permitting and monitoring and modeling. It also set up the classifications for attainment and non-attainment areas. Attainment areas are areas that meet the NAAQS. So if the EPA set a level of standard, for instance, for ozone, because I think that's what we're most familiar with, an area that meets the ozone standard is an attainment. An area that doesn't meet the ozone standard is a non-attainment. When these air quality standards were first enacted, we had over 20 areas that were in non-attainment. And I can thankfully say that right now, the state, except for St. Bernard Parish and a very small area in Evangeline Parish, which those two are in non-attainment for sulfur dioxide, but the rest of the state is in attainment for all of the NAAQS. It's been a very hard and long road, but we got there. And we got there primarily because we had the help of not only industry, but the general public. We finally were able to educate the general public and showed them that they had a role in this too. And that's how we got there. So once you have the NAAQS, you're either attainment or non-attainment, then comes in the state implementation plan. And that's, I'm going to talk about the criteria pollutants first, and then we'll go into the state implementation plan so that you can see all of the parts and pieces that go into it. Okay, as I said, there are 6 criteria pollutants. I have them listed there on the screen, and they're not in any order. It's ozone, particulate matter, which is, there are 2 types of particulate matter that we look at: sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, lead, and carbon monoxide. And these standards are designed to protect the public health within an adequate margin of safety. You can't protect everyone in every situation, so you have to look at it as a whole. And I think that the scientists at EPA have done a good job. For instance, ozone at first was a 1-hour standard, but people aren't outside for just 1 hour. If you work outside, you're outside for 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day. And so they redesigned that standard to be an 8-hour standard. And I think as technology changes, the standards change. And so it's a living, breathing action that is updated regularly. EPA has to review the standards every 5 years. They don't have to revise them every 5 years, but sometimes technology allows the revisions to take place every 5 years, which is pretty advantageous for those of us who work in air quality. Okay, I think I kind of went over this, that, you know, first and foremost, our job is to apply the Clean Air Act. It's to make sure that the department follows what the federal law says, and to develop rules and regulations so that we can monitor industry, monitor traffic, motor vehicles, monitor our area sources so that we know what's going on and we can control as much as possible the air pollutants that are put into the air. Like I said, when we are non-attainment, then we write a SIP. The SIP is a plan. It discusses how we're going to get from point A to point B and bring the area into attainment. When we start this process, we usually hold stakeholder meetings. The first meetings we usually have are with industry, because they're the people who are going to have to put on the controls. But after we meet with industry and we listen to what they have to say, we then pull in the general public, and we have public meetings so that we can hear your ideas. We want to know what's going on in your neighborhood, because sometimes the big wigs come in from industry and they don't live in your area, so they don't really know. So we look at public meetings as probably one of our biggest information gathering tools. There are two different kinds of standards. You have the primary standards, and then you have the secondary standards. The primary standards are there to protect against adverse health effects. There are tests and trials run all the time by EPA in research and development, how particulate matter, how ozone, how CO, how SO2, NOx, lead affect the human body. What is the most a person can be exposed to and still maintain a healthy body? What is that level? Then we also have the secondary standards. This is how does dust, particulate matter, ozone, SO2, how does that affect our crops? How, when it gets into the ground, how does it affect vegetation? Does it do damage to buildings? Because, anybody who has concrete here knows that you have to wash it every once in a while. Well, that concrete doesn't get dirty because you're walking on it or driving on it. It gets dirty because when it rains, the deposition in the air is washed out and it falls to the ground. So we need to know, is that degrading the concrete? Is it impeding the structural integrity of buildings? What exactly happens there? So that's the secondary part of the NAAQS. This is a chart that I put in so that you can refer to. It gives the pollutant, the primary standards, and then our averaging times. It's different for every pollutant because nothing is made the same. My mom used to always say that's why God made chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry, because no two things are alike. Each pollutant affects your health differently. The amount of time that you're exposed to it, the quantity you are exposed to. So they have come up with these averaging times for the states to adhere to through monitoring. And we do have a monitoring group. I think there's a monitoring Enviroschool on Tamika's website. So you could refer to that too if you wanted more information on this. But if you ever need to know why we say what we say, it's because of this chart when we talk about averaging times and the standard. Okay, I'm going to start off with carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is actually most prevalent from vehicles. It comes from other outdoor sources of pollution, but the biggest culprit in carbon monoxide is vehicle traffic. There is some that comes from industry, but industry has controlled it to the NAAQS. Unfortunately, the state doesn't have any control over the manufacturer of motor vehicles. That's a national rule. So EPA handles that. And I think with the development of cleaner fuels, cleaner burning engines, especially the electric engines, or even some of the alternative fuel engines, such as propane, because with propane, your exhaust is water. So you miss the carbon monoxide there. You alleviate that pollutant. The other thing that I would like to mention is that for those of you who smoke or know a smoker, when you inhale from a cigarette, you're getting carbon monoxide poisoning. So if you take what is written on the standard and you look at it, there are other ways that you can keep yourself from being exposed to carbon monoxide. It's not just an exterior pollutant. Lead is a peculiar pollutant at best. It doesn't stay airborne very long. Lead is can be emitted. Our biggest issue was with battery plants. You know, everybody that has a lead acid battery in their vehicle, unless they have an electric vehicle, then they usually have a lithium ion battery. But if you have any type of internal combustion engine, you're going to have a battery on the inside of it to start that engine. So battery plants were very prolific in the United States. And until we understood that the lead that was escaping through the air was depositing on the ground, and once it gets on the ground, you have that secondary standard where it can hurt the vegetation. But the biggest thing with lead was that it would also get into our water resources. And the bigger issue there was in the groundwater. So because lots of Louisianians get their drinking water from groundwater. So we had to cure that problem. Lead is available in pipes. I know a lot of you have read about the issues that they're having in Flint, Michigan with the lead in the pipes. That's not airborne, but it's still an issue. So lead, while it is a criteria air pollutant, it's not as prevalent in air as it is in other sources. Nitrogen dioxide, or what we call NOx. NOx usually comes a lot from vehicles, but mostly from your energy plants. In recent years, a lot of the plants have gone to burning natural gas, which is way cleaner than the fuel oil or the bunker fuel or the coal that they use to generate electricity originally. NOx is, it can be a powdery substance. It's part of the carbon buildup that you see on your exhaust. It's not just carbon, it's sometimes with the NOx also. EPA at one time set up a rule where they were looking for on-road NOx, and they set up studies to see how individuals were affected. And this was very prevalent in the Baton Rouge area as well as the New Orleans area. I can't speak for anywhere else in the state. Traffic jams. How were humans exposed to NOx while they were in their cars sitting in traffic? And so they put up monitors to try and get an idea of what the NOx content in the air was around the interstate areas. And they did it in very congested areas. The results of the study were interesting in that in areas where you had mixing, which is you have some wind in the area or a breeze in the area that will mix the air, it wasn't as bad as areas where there was little or no mixing. The Baton Rouge area and the New Orleans area actually had little impact on the individuals who were in the traffic, which, you know, we took as a good sign that at least our interstate areas were somewhere where there was enough mixing to keep our individuals safe. Particulate matter comes in two forms, or is regulated in two forms. In the industry, we call it coarse or fine particulate matter. To scientifically look at it, you have to know that it is PM 2.5 or PM 10. This diagram gives you an indication of what the size of PM 10 is versus PM 2.5. you can see that there's a piece of sand from the beach, and it looks very large in the diagram. But when you look at it compared to PM10, which is dust, pollen, mold, it seems rather large in comparison. And then when you go down to PM10, which is truly microscopic, it gets even smaller. And these are the particles that you breathe in. It would be difficult to breathe in a grain of sand and not either sneeze or have it caught in your nasal cavities. PM10 and PM2.5 can penetrate that, and it can get into your lungs and make breathing difficult. So this is why they wore masks in China during the Olympics, is because China had a PM problem. You can see it in the air when it is in great amounts. You think that those are big dust particles, but it's not. They're really microscopic. So that's why we regulate particulate matter. The next one is ozone. And I think this is the one that most people are familiar with because it's called smog. It's also the one that the state has had the most issues with. It took a while for us to finally get to a balance, because air quality is definitely a balance where we could have industry, we could have individuals, and all of the parts and pieces together harmoniously and not affect air quality. I think one of the biggest things about ozone is that it's not directly emitted. Out of all 6 criteria pollutants, this is the one that forms in the air. It takes precursor chemicals to be in the air. And the precursor chemicals are NOx, which I've already covered, and then a volatile organic compound. And VOCs are not criteria pollutants, but they're in the air. And so when NOx and VOC combine in the presence of sunlight, this diagram says heat. Heat is not always a factor, because Wyoming, unfortunately, has more ozone issues during the winter because of the albedo that happens when the snow falls. But it's sunlight. It's the radiative properties of sunlight that cook, for all intents and purposes, these compounds in the air and create ozone. So it's very difficult to control ozone, because you have to know what's in the air at all times in order to make sure that you don't have too much of one or not enough of the other. For instance, at night, NOx will, in layman's term, eat the VOCs that create ozone, because there's no sunlight. And goodness knows it's hot in Louisiana at night without the sun. So that's why I say heat is not always one of the components. But then when the sun starts to come up and we watch it grow during the day, the NOx and the VOCs combine to form ozone, and we watch the ozone values increase. So it's difficult to make sure that you have what you need in the air and how to control it. And it takes a great amount of modeling to recreate exceedances so that we know what was in the air, and then go about modeling how to fix that problem. So ozone is peculiar in that fact. The next criteria pollutant is sulfur dioxide. Sulfur dioxide, I have a picture of a carbon calciner facility um, in the presentation, it comes from any number of sources, including volcanoes. So it's not always easy to control the amount of SO2 you have in the air. Of course, we don't have any volcanoes here, so I guess that's one thing in our favor. SO2 is also a peculiar pollutant because it doesn't stay SO2 for very long in the air. It's one of the pollutants that attracts other molecules. It becomes SO3, SO4. It can become particulate matter. It can become an aerosol. So it's a little bit challenging to understand how long it stays SO2 in the air and how far it travels. The one thing that's not a problem is to know how to cure it. Technology has advanced such that there are any number of ways to, in industry terms, scrub the SO2 from the effluent that comes out of the stacks. So as the process is going through for carbon calcining, for instance, when they heat up the coke to process it, they can scrub the exhaust prior to it being emitted to the air, and they can scrub out the SO2. So that's a good thing. The other problem with SO2 is that it falls out of the sky. It's a heavy molecule, so it has what we refer to as downwash. And so we need to be able to protect the areas where downwash would happen. For anyone who's familiar with the areas around these carbon calciners or a carbon black plant, you know that it'll accumulate as dust, like on a swing set, on your car, on your roof, any number of areas. It's also one of those pollutants that accumulates in your driveway. Like I said earlier, you know, you power wash a driveway and you realize that the concrete underneath it is actually a lot whiter than, or brighter than it was before you started. So it's another one of those pollutants that comes down out of the air and then affects our lives and the lives of vegetation. So it's good that we have learned how to control it. I'm also including a copy of the air quality index. This air quality index is for all of the criteria pollutants. You can go to the AQI and look it up for each pollutant. It tells you when the air quality is good, when the air quality is moderate, maybe if you have asthma or a lung problem, when you should stay in, when you want the elderly to stay in, because of course their lung capacity is not as effective in dispelling pollutants as a younger person would be. We've never had a purple day in Louisiana, I can say that. We have had a couple of red days, especially early on during the Clean Air Act when we were trying to clean our act up. But for the most part, we're good or we're moderate. And the other thing I want you to understand is that with every criteria pollutant revision, these numbers stay the same. They just qualify them so that they know the limits on each part of the scale. For ozone, 50 will always be 0 to 50 will always be 0 to 50. Good will always be good. When ozone values are strengthened, We just make it the algorithm for the chart to meet that standard. So this will never change. You can always use it, and you can always feel rest assured that when you're seeing the information provided by EPA or the department, that it's all up to date. Earlier in the presentation, I told you that either an area is attainment or non-attainment. And the areas that are deemed non-attainment or attainment are usually set up by the, excuse me, by the census, because we look for population-based areas. So you will sometimes see that it is a metropolitan statistical area. The attainment and non-attainment areas in the New Orleans area have changed due to population center growths. The New Orleans area used to actually be a very small area, or a very large area, I'm sorry, a very large area. But then the population of New Orleans grew such that New Orleans is its own MSA. And then the areas populating on the outside, like Jefferson Parish, St. Charles Parish, Terrebonne, those areas have become their own metropolitan statistical areas, so that when we are found non-attainment for an area, sometimes it will be a larger area or a smaller area based on the population. For Baton Rouge, that area used to always be the 5-parish area, which was East Baton Rouge, Iberville, Livingston, Ascension, and West Baton Rouge. Since population growths have expanded to the north, we now encompass West Feliciana, East Feliciana, and St. Helena. So it's interesting how these parishes, when their populations grow, how they become part of a metropolitan statistical area. And like I said, it's not based on science, it's based on the census. Now we come down to the nuts and bolts of what's in a SIP. The typical SIP falls into 3 categories. You have the state adopted control measures, which are regulations or rules. It could be consent decrees from EPA. That these are what go into industrial permits. This is how we look at whether a facility can be built, how a facility can be modified, when technological changes are such that the facility can be modified and produce less pollution. So that's what those control measures are. Then we have the non-regulatory components. And then we also have the additional requirements of the Clean Air Act. We call it Section 110, the Section 110 rules. And those are established to set up our permitting program, set up our rule writing program, to set up any number of programs that the department would use to control air pollution. In the SIP, the first thing we do is we have to write a narrative. We have to tell them what problem it is we're curing, because the SIP, the state implementation plan, covers all 6 criteria pollutants. So we can't ever assume that EPA knows which one we're discussing. So we have to make sure that we spell that out. We have to make sure that we tell them that we have all of the authorities to produce this SIP, and to require that the industrial members follow the rules and regulations. We have specific, this says Part D, but it's the 110 non-attainment area plans that come from the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act has very specific rules that we have to follow when we write a SIP. Once an area has gone through non-attainment and is deemed attainment, we just can't turn off every rule that we've put into place. At that point, we put in maintenance plans, and maintenance plans run for 20 years after an area is an attainment. And so what the maintenance plan does is it says that we will not backslide. We will not relax any rules and regulations that have been put into place to bring the area into attainment, and that the state pledges that industry will follow all of these rules and regulations at least for the next 20 years. And I think in the beginning, 20 years didn't seem like such a long time. With technology changes on a daily basis, sometimes it seems like, goodness knows, we've gone from phones on the wall in your house with lines to smartphones that are not actually phones. They're just little mini computers that we call a phone that we carry in our pocket. So if you take that into consideration, you understand how much technology in industry has also changed. So we make sure that during the maintenance plan, the 20-year maintenance period, that if a facility needs to do a modification, that the only modifications they can make will enhance the rules that we have put in place and certainly not relax them. We also do not relax permit limits. We make sure that the permit limits that are written in our rules remain the same. For those of you who live in the 5-parish area, you understand what the vehicle inspection and maintenance program is, because you have to have your car inspected for emissions. Those of you who do not live in the 5-parish area are lucky, because you only pay $10. We pay $18. You can get 2-year stickers, and we have to have our vehicles inspected every year. And that's because we need to make sure that folks are not altering their vehicles and polluting the air. Manufacturers are very heavily regulated. And so we need to make sure that the federal rules that are enacted to have car manufacturers build vehicles that keep pollution at a minimum remain that way. There is an emissions inventory. The DEQ collects an emissions inventory every year from all of the facilities in the state. We report that emissions inventory to EPA on an annual basis. EPA uses that inventory to model, to see what air quality standards need to be revised, what don't need to be revised, where problem areas are, what pollutants seem to be either have great reductions or not reducing, or maybe there's an uptick in a pollution. So that's what we use the emissions inventory for. We also use it for permitting instances. We have a robust monitoring network around the state. Early on in the 1970s and 80s, and then following the amendments in the 90s, the state had, like I said, many areas, 20 non-attainment areas. So there are monitoring areas all over the state. Some of them even have co-located monitors, which is you have 2 of the same in an area, so that you can verify that the monitors are staying calibrated and that the information that we are receiving is correct. We have state statutes if we need to change rules based on a NAAQS revision. Our permitting program, Title V is probably the biggest program for air pollution, although we do have an oil and gas permitting program for the smaller mom and pop facilities. As you all know, with the shale industry coming in, we had lots and lots of oil and gas pop up in the early part of this century, early 2000s. So we cover a good amount of things. We also cover smaller area sources, dry cleaners, paint and body shops, things like that, that also emit pollutants into the air. We have attainment demonstrations, and in an attainment demonstration, we have to show EPA through modeling how we will cure the pollutant problem and maintain the NAAQS. We have transportation control measures. That would be synchronizing lights. It's the signs on the interstate that you see that tell you how long it's going to take you to get from point A to point B, or which very thankful sometimes, signs telling you that there's a wreck ahead or the road is closed or something like that. We have 15% rate of progress plans stating that how we are going to get that first 15% of a reduction of whatever pollutant we're going after in the shortest amount of time. And then things follow after that. We have the emergency episode plans, and this is if a facility has an emergency upset. For instance, in 1989, when Exxon exploded, that would be an emergency episode plan. And then we also have visibility plans, and visibility plans are more usually called regional haze. And that's actually a secondary pollutant. Haze is not, although the criteria pollutants cause haze, its visibility is to protect our national parks and scenic areas. It all came about because there were very many coal producing plants in the Grand Canyon area. And when folks would go out on their vacation to look at the vista across the Grand Canyon, they weren't seeing very far. And so a rule was put in place so that we can clean up these vistas, so that when we do go out and enjoy our national parks or the wildlife management areas, ours is the Breton Wildlife Management Area, that we can enjoy it. And so we take these plans very seriously. Although they don't deal with criteria pollutants directly, they do indirectly. Is the public available or able to comment on a SIP? Absolutely, and we welcome your comment. We welcome your comments if they are in writing. We welcome your comments if they are oral at a public hearing. It's the only way we know what you're thinking. And we work for you. We are public servants and you are the public. And so we need to know how you're thinking, what you experience every day in your life, because what you experience is not what I experience in my office every day. It's not what I experience at my home. We need to know what you experience. We need to know what's bothering you. So public comments to me are probably one of the best resources that I use, because then I know what the problem is. You know, EPA can issue a revision to the NAAQS. We can look at all of the data, but until we get the human part of it, we really don't know how this is affecting people. And so please, I invite you, always make sure, if you feel like you need to have your voice heard, comment at a public hearing. And I don't even care if you're just signing on to one of the postcard public hearing things where you sign your name, if it's one of the internet public hearings where you sign your name and you join onto a petition, let us know, because your voice is important to us. For SIP matters, we don't always schedule a public hearing, because we seem to piggyback on the rule revision public hearings that are held monthly, and we weren't getting a whole lot of attention with those. And so it was kind of slowing us down. So we developed a method that if you know that this is coming up and you want a public hearing, all you have to do is request one and we will schedule it. And that way we know that we're going to hear the people that this program matters to, and not have to sit through all of the other comments on rules that don't affect us. So please utilize that tool. We welcome your comments. I can't make that important enough. State regulations are a result of changes to the NAAQS. A lot of times, it might be that we already have a regulation on the book that needs to be tweaked. It might be that we need to write a new regulation. It might be something that has come up to EPA that I always say that curing one problem always exacerbates another one. And so sometimes when we cure ozone, we exacerbate an ammonia problem, or we exacerbate an SO2 problem. So the rule and the permitting programs seem to be pretty living, breathing as much as the SIP program is. And so rules are revised on a regular basis. And if you ever need to know where the regulations are, they are contained in the Louisiana Administrative Code, Chapter 33, Section 3. They are on our website. And if you need to know the corresponding federal regulations, it's Chapter 40 is where EPA is. I'm not sure where all of the air rules are because they're all interspersed, but I do know it's Chapter 40. Okay. When an area is redesignated to attainment, for all of the criteria pollutants except SO2, areas have to monitor attainment. So that would mean that the air quality samples that we are taking at our monitoring stations, after 3 years, we have good data and we can redesignate the area to attainment. For SO2, not only do we have to monitor it, but we also have to model it because, as I said earlier in the presentation, SO2 is a very peculiar pollutant in that it changes form to become SO2, SO3, SO4, or an aerosol. And so we don't know exactly when that happens. So we need to model it as well to make sure that we are capturing all of the possibilities in the area where the pollutant could dissipate. So anyway, we once we have all of this data, we contact EPA, and if they are in agreement, they look at our data and they are in agreement, then we start a redesignation plan. And that redesignation takes a non-attainment area to attainment. I've done this twice for the Baton Rouge area for ozone. You're writing a SIP again. You're going through and you're, instead of solving the problem, you're going to tell EPA how you're going to keep the problem from happening again. And so that's what the maintenance plan was about that I described earlier. It's time consuming. It's a challenge, but it's probably one of the happiest challenges I get to do when I get to take a non-attainment area back into attainment. So it's one of the jobs that I really look forward to. And that is the end of my presentation, except to say that I forgot to put in a slide to tell you how you can be informed daily about air quality. One is Enviroflash, and it's spelled ENVIROFLASH. It is a technology that we use to let you know what the forecast is for air quality. You can sign up for it. You can get it on your phone. You can get an email. You can look at it on the internet. The other one is, and that comes from the department. It's not a product of the department, but we monitor who in the state is on it to make sure that you're getting the necessary updates that you need. The other program that you can use, EPA has what is called Air Now, all one word, AIRNOW. You can look at anywhere in the United States and you can see the air quality. I think almost in the world, but I know EPA pretty much does the United States. There are other companies that give you air quality around the world. So if you're a world traveler, if you're a cruiser, whatever, you can always have air quality at your fingertips. The slide I have up right now has my contact information, and it also has my right hand, Vanetta Hayes' contact information. Vanetta is my chemical engineer who works closely with me. I am not an engineer. I am not a chemist. I am just a plain old air quality scientist. I deal with weather and climate, which is pretty much moves air quality around the world. She tells me about the components of the pollution that we have in our air quality. So we make a good team. If you ever need anything and you can't get a hold of me, you can always get a hold of Vanetta. One of us will answer you. So please do not hesitate to contact us. I've also given you a list of the resources that I used if you are interested in looking further into this. I have all of EPA's information on the different criteria pollutions that I discussed earlier in the program.